everyone. I'm gonna make this intro quick because they're always awkward and drone on for too long, like I'm actively making it happen again now. This is gonna be another Create This Book video. I did 4 entries since this upload is really late. I'm trying to experiment with my upload schedule, and I'm trying to find time to upload twice a week now. Hopefully I can make it happen. And yeah, that's it, so just gonna get started. So getting right into it, I am breaking out the book and I am flipping to our first prompt. We must create art with wax. Decorate this page using only wax, candle wax, crayons, etc. Sometimes I watch Create This Book flip-throughs just for some inspiration and ideas, and I see that for this page, so many people just draw or color something with wax, which is following the rules and everything, but I wanted to do something different from that, but I did end up using crayons for it. I decided that this would be a great opportunity to try crayon melt art or whatever it's called for the first time. I've never done it before, but I've always thought it looked really cool. I had to improvise with what surface I was going to use, so I just took some paper and I taped it onto this wrapped canvas, and then I took my hot glue gun and glued all of the crayons to the canvas, but to where they were resting over the paper. I was only using a box of 24, so I didn't have that many variations on the colors, but I think that worked out perfectly because I wasn't using quite a large surface anyway. I got a little salty about how lazy they're getting with their colors and their names. I thought I had 2 blue crayons, but it turns out it is the same color blue, but it has a different name. Bluetiful. I mean, I love puns and wordplay, but how lazy is that? Honestly, I'm starting to see the problem that Nerdy Crafter has with this company. Despite my saltiness, I did add it into the color arrangement because I wanted to use as many colors as I possibly could. Now I'm just trying to arrange the shades to go from darkest to lightest so it has a more smooth transition into each color. And then I finally began gluing them down. I wanted the tips to be over the edge of the paper so that they would drip directly onto it, but I wanted to make sure they were glued onto the canvas because if they got glued onto the paper, they would probably peel wax off when I removed them, and that's not what I wanted to happen. I know some people take the paper labels off the crayons before they glue them, but I didn't really find that necessary, so to avoid an extra step I didn't need to make, I just went ahead and glued them directly onto the canvas as they were. And with me being the genius that I am, I failed to realize that I left out this shade of red. That was sitting right in front of me, the whole time. Once I had them all glued onto the canvas, I stood it up and I used my blow dryer and just blew it over the crayons to melt them. It didn't take quite as long as I thought it would for them to start melting and dripping. Unfortunately, I did get a splatter effect along with the dripping. I think I just need to practice aiming and controlling where the heat blows. Regardless, it did come out looking pretty cool. I like that the colors didn't all merge into each other to make that gross brown that rainbows sometimes do when you mix them too much. Then I just took the paper off the canvas and moved it to the left a little so that the blank spot would be underneath the crayon so I could cover that with rainbow as well. Once the wax hardened, some of it started peeling up, and I didn't like that, so I tried to use my blow dryer to melt it back down onto the paper, and that didn't really go how I wanted it to. Instead, it kind of just caused more drippage and splattering, so I decided to leave well enough alone and just glue down whatever chunks came off when I was done. Next, I took the sheet of paper and I lined it up with my book to figure out where to cut it so it would fit more nicely onto the pages. Sadly, I had to cut out a chunk of really nice smooth and red orange from the paper so the prompt was still visible. I was not very happy about that. And what's even worse is that I didn't align it properly, so I had to cut even more of the color out until you could see the whole prompt. So I wasted so much of the wax color. Later on, I did try to glue back in some of the pieces that I had cut off to make up for the missing color. I got some back, but not a whole lot of it. Next, I cut out these really poorly printed silhouettes. My printer has been really messed up lately. I have no idea why, but I knew it wasn't a big deal because I could just color in the streaks with black marker. After doing that, I neatened up the edges by cutting off more of the white, and then I tried to find good placement for them on the wax art. I know I didn't do this entirely right. I know there's a way to make it look like the rain is dripping down and off the umbrella, but I didn't remember how to do that, so I just figured this was good enough and it still looked cool anyway. I printed out silhouettes of 2 girls, one of them a more teenage-looking one, and then a child, and I also printed out a little frog, and I wanted it to look like she was squatting and looking at a frog that was in a puddle. I think this came out really cute. I like it a lot. I think I definitely want to revisit melted crayon art, and I want to get better at it because it was lots of fun. On to the second prompt of the video, which is to create a pocket. But first I had to take care of whatever was making the book bump up because it was really annoying and it was going to get in the way of my working. And I found out it was Pipe Cleaner Pom Pom Santa, who has apparently relocated his arm to a very inappropriate place. I needed this thing gone, but I was not touching it. Eventually, I'd like to go back on all of the pages that I regret and look at in disgust now, and I'd like to redo them. So I figured peeling off Pipe Cleaner Pom Pom Santa wouldn't be a huge deal, since he's probably one of my worst creations. Unfortunately, after removing his torso, I was still experiencing some annoying bumpage, so I had to scrape up the rest of his remains as well. There we go. Good as new. If they come for us, this never happened. So, about that pocket. The instructions said to glue the side and the bottom, but instead I glued the top and bottom, so I ended up with a horizontal pocket. And yes, that was intentional. I took the measurements of the page of the book and I cut out a regular piece of printer paper and then I crumbled it all up. I did this 2 more times, so I had 3 sheets of paper. I laid them all down in a deep pan and then I poured some tea over them and let them soak. After soaking them for a little while, I let them dry, so then I had some fake parchment paper. They weren't as stained as I would have wanted them to be, but they still came out with a pretty cool texture and a slight brown color. I glued one of the sheets onto the page, and then I traced out a long triangular shape on another to make that look like the flap of an envelope. Once I was done sketching it out, I cut it out, and then I glued it onto the edge of the paper, so it really started to come together and look like an envelope. For the next step, I needed a red crayon with some of the paper peeled back. And fire. I held the crayon over some parchment paper that I had already scribbled on, so I didn't really need it anymore, and then I melted it with the lighter. I tried my best to get it all to drip collectively into one spot without looking too uniform. Then, once it dried, I peeled it off the parchment paper and glued it onto the envelope. To be sure that it really stuck in place, I put the lighter over it and turned it on for a few seconds to get it to melt back onto this paper. Thanks for rubbing up against the mic while I am recording my voiceover work, Dot. This method wasn't working out too well, especially because I didn't want to get the flame too close to the paper. So I just melted the crayon over the wax seal instead, hoping that it would drip in the places I wanted it to. Of course it didn't, and I tried my best to peel off the wax stain that it left, but I couldn't really get it, so that lives there now, unfortunately. This was when Dot decided to come and hang out, thankfully when I was done with the lighter. I realized that the envelope flap wasn't the shape I wanted it to be, so I sketched some outlines and used my X-Acto knife to carve the pieces out. Now that I finally had the envelope I wanted, it was time to really bring it to life with some extra details. I wanted this to look like a letter from Hogwarts, so it needed the crest on it. I was going to originally draw it directly on the envelope, but then I decided to draw it on some scrap parchment paper I had made. That way if I messed up, I wouldn't ruin the envelope itself. This isn't the first time I've tried to draw the Hogwarts crest. I can never do the silhouettes of the animals nicely, so I don't really bother trying with those at this point. But when I was done, I went over it with my black pen. I wanted to use Sharpie, but that would have bled too much and made the lines way more thick than I needed them, and it would have made it look even worse. Once I had the crest cut out, I glued it onto the envelope, and it was really starting to come together. Part of the instructions for this prompt was to keep something in the pocket that was made, so I thought it would make perfect sense to make a Hogwarts acceptance letter to keep in it. I hand wrote them for a more realistic effect, also because these parchment paper sheets were way too small to try to print on, and it was just more fun this way. I used some templates and references offline to make this, and I did my best to recreate the font that was used. However, it did look very typed, so it's hard to handwrite typed font. Not to mention, I am a wicked scatterbrain, so as you can see here alone, I failed to make the first W in the letter match the other ones. Aside from that, I was trying my best to be very careful not to make any spelling errors or extra letters, because that is something I tend to do a lot. And here we are witnessing some signature forgery. Don't tell Professor McGonagall, because I have a feeling she would not be very happy about this. This video is just full of criminal activity, isn't it? Once the acceptance letter was done, I needed to draw another crest to glue to the top of the page, but I decided to trace it this time instead of try and eyeball it, which was still pretty complicated, but much easier than not having something to trace over. However, even with the tracing method, the silhouettes of the animals still came out looking like garbage. The crests on the letters actually have little ribbons above and below them with writing on them, unlike the crest on the outside of the envelope that was just the picture itself. So I had to draw those as well. I went over the sketch outlines with my black pen, and then I started to add in the writing, which was very nerve-wracking because I had to make sure that it would all fit in the ribbon that I drew. Fun fact, the school motto underneath the crest in Latin translates to "Never tickle a sleeping dragon." And that's the one thing I took away from 9th grade Latin class. Because the Hogwarts letter mentions including a list of all books and materials needed, that meant that I'd have to make another letter that included this crest at the top of it too. So I used the flashlight on my phone and put it underneath the first crest I drew so I could just trace over it. I had the paper folded in such a way that I wouldn't have to worry about the drawing moving around and losing track of my line work, so this was all very convenient. When I was done, I cut it out and glued it onto the top of the page, just like last time. Sadly, the glue did stain the parchment paper, so I had to learn not to use it as a surface to apply glue. Once I had the crest applied to the top of the page, I started writing out the list of supplies. I was a lot more nervous for this one than I was the acceptance letter because it had much more writing on it, so I had to make sure that it would all fit on the paper. Not to mention, that left a lot more opportunity to make mistakes, which, as you can see, I did end up doing. I was starting to run out of room, and I was very nervous that I wasn't going to have enough, so I just took the first letter of each line and plotted those out ahead of time, that way I knew that I would have enough room to write it all. I had to make the last list very tiny, almost to the point where it can't be read, because I needed to make sure I had enough room for students may also bring an owl, cat, or a toad, because that part is probably the most important to me. Lastly, I took an image of a ticket to platform 9 3/4, and then I copied it and made it upside down attached to the bottom of itself, then I cut it out and folded it. I didn't want to hand draw this because it had way too much detail, and I guess I'm just a lazy, unmotivated person. Anyway, I glued the ticket shut, and just like that, I had a first-year Hogwarts starter pack. I'm really proud of this idea. It kind of just came to me after I made the envelope, but I'm glad that it all came together. The next prompt I'm going to is to create doodles. And the instructions are pretty straightforward. We just need to fill the entire page with mindless doodling. I'm cutting out separate sheets of paper to glue into the book to do this on because my plan was to use Sharpies and I didn't want them bleeding through onto the other pages. And of course, I needed to cut out a little window so the prompt was still visible. When I was gluing the page in, my glue stick fell apart, and I thought this was the last glue stick that I had, so out of blind desperation, I rummaged through my adhesives drawer and thankfully found this beauty. So I could finally finish gluing the papers into the book, and then I went ahead and got my dual-tipped alcohol markers and my Sharpie collection and started doodling. To start off, I wanted to have a pattern of the 4 elements going in the order of fire, water, earth, and air, but eventually I kind of just slipped into my own idea of using colors that I thought looked well together. So I just kind of did exactly what the prompt said and mindlessly doodled all over the page. I didn't want to cheat and plan things out ahead of time, so I kind of just did whatever came to me at the moment, and unfortunately, that did result in some derpy faces at times. I guess there were a lot more derpy faces than I realized. When I finally reached the end of the page, I continued some of the patterns on the other side of the border going around the prompt just to make it look more complete. I also decided to color in the letters of the prompt just to make it look less boring and bland, and it was an opportunity to add in some more color. When I started the new page, I completely forgot that I wanted to start it at the top right corner and work my way down to the bottom left. So unfortunately, I kind of have this repetitive motion in both doodling pages, and I'm not thrilled about it, but there's not much I can do about it now. I did try and switch it up a bit by using more bold color patterns, as well as adding in different doodles and shapes that I didn't do in the previous one. Here it is all finished. I know a lot of people like to do doodling like this to calm themselves down. I'm not sure I find it calming. I think I find it mildly frustrating, but it is satisfying to see the final end result. I'm just not sure it's worth it for me. In my Create This Book videos, I normally only do 3 prompts, but I thought since I uploaded this video pretty late, I would try and make up for it by doing a bonus prompt. This prompt is to create an alien. It says to draw what I think an alien looks like and to try and think outside the box, which is not something that I normally do. I think what Mariah meant by think outside the box was to not do your typical green or gray, black, beady-eyed alien that you'd find in Area 51, so I tried to stay as far as possible from that idea. I cut out some sheets of paper to glue into the book since I was planning on using paint for the background. I also cut out another window so the prompt would stay visible. I painted both of the sheets black since I wanted this background to resemble outer space. I went ahead and glued those down, and then I filled in any awkward white spaces with a black marker. Then I took some white paint and a toothbrush and I dipped the toothbrush into the white paint and I made little flecks to look like stars. I put that aside and then I started working on my alien drawing. I have this beautiful, detailed sketch that I poured my soul into to use as a reference. This was the best I could do with thinking outside the box for aliens, and I think this borderline looks more like a monster, but I'm not really sure what the difference is at this point. You know, there's the obvious living in outer space and flying saucers and stuff. But visually, we don't know what they look like. They could look like monsters. This design was partially inspired by a drawing my boyfriend made. He made what he called a goo monster. I wish I had a picture of it to show you guys, but I don't, and I'm running low on time for editing. Anyway, yeah, so the inspiration goes to him. I wanted this alien to look very slimy and gooey, and hopefully I achieved that with these random drips and blobs and stuff on her body. I didn't want to color her the traditional alien green, so I decided to color her purple. To make the dripping goo effect more obvious, I colored the drips a lighter shade of purple. Then I drew on the stem for her eyeball. I cut her out and then I glued her into the background. I colored in the white spots around her outline that I couldn't quite cut out completely. I didn't draw her an eyeball because I thought it would be more fun to glue a googly eye down instead. Then, for the first time in this video, I'm following my rule to apply a sticker to my page after it's been finished. Here is my alien on her background. I think that it was a good idea. It's still looking pretty empty to me, so I'm sure I'll revisit it later to fill in the whole thing. That's gonna do it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I'm really sorry my upload schedule has been wonky lately. Like I said, I'm gonna start experimenting with that because I'm really trying to up my subscriber count. So if you think you know somebody that would enjoy my content, please feel free to share my videos with them. With all that being said, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to leave a like and comment. And if you're new here, please consider subscribing. My current goal is 500. Also, let me know in the comments which of the pages were your favorite. Thank you again for watching. I'll see you guys next time. Bye!